Look, I already told you. It's gonna be $4,000 to fix this thing. I can't make miracles happen.
When 73-year-old Robert Dillard walked into Prestige Auto Repair in Columbus, Ohio, on a Tuesday morning in March of 2019, he already knew the news wasn't going to be good. His 2004 Ford Crown Victoria had been acting up for weeks, lurching between gears, hesitating at intersections, that sickening shudder every time he tried to merge onto the highway. Robert had driven that car for 11 years. He bought it used from a retired state trooper in 2008 with 60,000 miles on it and a fresh set of tyres. It was the most reliable thing in his life, and now it was dying on him. He stood at the counter in his faded Greenfield jacket, the one with the worn patches on the sleeves, and he asked the service advisor a simple question: how much to fix a transmission? The answer nearly knocked him off his feet. $4,000. Robert had $812 in his checking account. His next VA disability check wasn't coming for another 19 days, and his Social Security wouldn't hit until the first of the month. If you've ever watched someone do the math in their head and come up short, you know the look. That slow blink, that slight drop of the shoulders, that quiet nod that means a man just accepted something painful. Robert Dillard did all three. If this story hits close to home, comment Brotherhood below before we continue. Robert hadn't always been the kind of man who counted pennies at a repair counter. There was a time when Robert Dillard was one of the most capable soldiers in the 25th Infantry Division. He deployed to Vietnam in 1968 as a 22-year-old corporal assigned to a mechanized infantry unit operating in the Cu Chi district northwest of Saigon. His job was maintaining armored personnel carriers under fire, keeping engines running when shrapnel tore through radiator lines, replacing transmissions in the field with nothing but hand tools and sheer determination. He earned a Bronze Star for recovering a disabled APC under mortar fire during a convoy ambush along Route 1. He pulled 3 wounded men from that vehicle before the ammunition started cooking off. By the time he rotated home in 1970, Robert Dillard had logged more hours under the hood of military vehicles than most mechanics see in a career. But nobody at Prestige Auto Repair knew any of that. They saw an old man in a worn jacket with a car that wasn't worth fixing, and they treated him accordingly. The service advisor at Prestige was a man named Dale Buckner. Mid-40s, clean polo shirt with the shop logo embroidered on the chest, a clipboard in his hand and a Bluetooth earpiece he never seemed to take out. Dale had been running the front counter for 6 years and he had a system. Older car, older owner, vague complaint about shifting. That was a full transmission rebuild every single time. It didn't matter what was actually wrong. The diagnosis was always the same because the profit margin was always the same. A full rebuild at Prestige ran between $3,800 and $4,200, depending on how much Dale thought the customer could pay. Parts cost the shop about $1,100. Labour was another $800. The rest was pure markup. Dale looked at Robert's Crown Victoria sitting in the parking lot, with its oxidized paint and its mismatched hubcap on the rear passenger side, and he saw exactly what he expected to see. A car that wasn't worth saving, owned by a man who didn't know any better. He quoted $4,000 even. Robert asked if there was anything cheaper. Dale shook his head slowly, the way people do when they're pretending to feel sorry. He said the whole transmission was shot, said it needed a complete teardown, said if Robert didn't fix it now, the car would strand him on the highway, and then he'd be looking at a tow bill on top of everything else. He said it with the practiced tone of a man who had delivered this exact speech hundreds of times. Then Dale did something that crossed a line. He slid a document across the counter. It was a vehicle surrender form. He told Robert that if he couldn't afford the repair, the shop would take the car off his hands. They'd waive the diagnostic fee, which was $120, and Robert could walk away clean. What Dale didn't mention was that Prestige had a side arrangement with a used car wholesaler who bought surrendered vehicles for pennies and flipped them at auction. Robert's Crown Victoria, even with the transmission issue, was worth at least $2,500 at wholesale. The shop would pocket that money and Robert would lose his only transportation. Robert picked up the form. He read it slowly. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. He'd been through worse than this. He'd been through things that would break most people in half. But there's something uniquely painful about being old and broke, and standing in front of someone who sees you as nothing more than an opportunity. Robert asked for a pen. He was going to sign it. He was going to hand over the keys and walk home in the cold because he couldn't see another option. That's the moment Marcus Cole walked through the door. Marcus Cole was 34 years old, 6'1", with the kind of build that suggested he still kept up with the fitness habits the army had drilled into him. He was wearing a dark grey work jacket with the name of his shop stitched over the left pocket. Cole's Garage. It was a small independent operation on the east side of Columbus. 3 bays, 2 lifts, and more work than Marcus could handle most weeks. He'd opened it 2 years earlier after separating from the army as a staff sergeant with the 3rd Infantry Division. 8 years of service, 2 deployments to Afghanistan, and a mechanical aptitude that his platoon sergeant once described as borderline supernatural. Marcus could diagnose an engine problem by sound alone. He could feel a misfire through the steering wheel at 40 miles an hour. He'd rebuilt Humvee transmissions in forward operating bases with sand in everything, and temperatures that warped metal. After he got out, he used his GI Bill benefits and a small business loan to open his own shop. He wasn't getting rich, but he was building something honest. He'd come to Prestige that morning for one reason. He needed a specific transmission filter for a customer's Chevy Tahoe, and the parts store across town was out of stock. Prestige had a parts counter in the back. Marcus figured he'd be in and out in 5 minutes. He didn't make it to the parts counter. He stopped about 10 feet from the service desk because he heard Dale's voice carrying across the lobby. Dale was explaining to Robert that the surrender form was standard procedure, and that plenty of customers found it easier to just let the car go rather than deal with a big repair bill. Marcus watched the old man holding the pen. He watched the way Robert's hand hovered over the signature line, and he watched Dale lean forward with that salesman posture, elbows on the counter, nodding encouragingly, already mentally calculating the wholesale payout. Marcus had seen that posture before, not in a repair shop, in Kandahar when translators negotiated with local contractors who didn't know what their own labour was worth. It was the posture of someone who knew they had leverage over someone who didn't understand the game. Marcus walked up to the counter. He didn't introduce himself to Dale. He looked at Robert and asked a direct question. "What's your car doing?" Robert turned to him and described it simply. Hard shifts, hesitation between 2nd and 3rd gear, sometimes a delay going into reverse, especially when it was cold. Marcus nodded. He asked how many miles were on it. Robert said 168,000. Marcus asked if the check engine light was on. Robert said it had come on about 2 weeks ago. Marcus asked if the fluid was dark or burnt smelling. Robert paused and said he wasn't sure, but he didn't think it smelled burnt last time he checked. Marcus looked at Dale. He asked what diagnostic codes the shop had pulled. Dale's expression changed. It went from helpful salesman to defensive in about half a second. He said the codes indicated a transmission malfunction. Marcus asked which specific code. Dale looked at his clipboard and said, P0750. Marcus almost laughed. He didn't, because he had more respect for the old man standing next to him than to turn this into a performance. But P0750 is a shift solenoid, a malfunction code. It's one of the most common and most straightforward transmission-related codes on Ford vehicles of that era. It doesn't mean the transmission is destroyed. It means a single electrical component inside the valve body has failed or is sticking. The part itself costs between $40 and $80 depending on the brand. On a Crown Victoria with the 4R70W transmission, replacing it is a 2-hour job at most. You drop the pan, swap the solenoid, replace the filter and gasket while you're in there, refill the fluid, and you're done. Total cost in parts, even using quality components, is under $200. Marcus turned to Robert and told him plainly, "Your transmission isn't shot. You've got a bad shift solenoid. It's a small part. I can fix it right here in the parking lot if you'll let me." Robert stared at him for a long moment, the kind of look a man gives when he's trying to figure out if something is real. He asked how much. Marcus said nothing. Robert didn't understand at first. He asked again. Marcus repeated himself. He said, "I'm not charging you for this." Dale stepped in fast. He told Marcus he couldn't perform unauthorized work in their parking lot. Marcus ignored him completely. He looked at Robert and asked where the car was parked. Robert pointed through the glass doors to the Crown Victoria sitting in the 2nd row. Marcus told him to go sit in the lobby, where it was warm, and give him about 90 minutes. Then Marcus walked out to his truck, which was a 2012 Ram 2500 with a full toolbox bolted to the bed, and started pulling out what he needed. Dale followed him outside. He told Marcus this was prestige property and he was trespassing. Marcus stopped what he was doing and turned around. He was calm. He spoke quietly enough that Robert couldn't hear from inside. He told Dale that he'd pulled the code from the customer's paperwork. He said P0750 on a 4R70W is a solenoid, not a rebuild. He said Dale knew that. He said quoting $4,000 for a $200 repair on an elderly veteran living on a fixed income wasn't just dishonest. It was predatory. And he said that if Dale wanted to call the police over a man fixing a car in a parking lot, Marcus would be happy to wait right here and explain to the officers exactly what kind of business Prestige was running. He said he'd also be happy to post the diagnostic paperwork and the $4,000 estimate online with a detailed explanation of what the repair actually required. Dale went back inside. He didn't call the police. Marcus worked on the Crown Victoria for just over an hour. He dropped the transmission pan carefully, letting the fluid drain into a catch basin he kept in his truck for mobile jobs. The fluid was dark but not burnt. The filter was clogged but not destroyed. He pulled the valve body solenoid pack and found exactly what he expected. Solenoid A was stuck open. The electrical connector showed signs of corrosion but wasn't damaged beyond cleaning. He replaced all 4 solenoids while he was in there because once you've got the pan off, it makes no sense to leave old ones sitting next to a new one. He replaced the filter. He replaced the pan gasket. He cleaned the magnets on the inside of the pan, which had collected the normal amount of fine metallic particles you'd expect at that mileage. Nothing alarming. Nothing that indicated catastrophic wear. He refilled the transmission with the correct Mercon V fluid, checked the level with the engine running and the transmission cycled through all gears, and buttoned everything up. Total parts cost was $187. Marcus paid for them out of his own pocket using the supplies he had in his truck. When he walked back into the lobby, Robert was sitting in a plastic chair near the vending machines. His hands were folded in his lap. He looked up when Marcus came through the door and there was something in his expression that went beyond gratitude. It was the look of a man who'd been preparing to lose something important, and then didn't. Marcus handed him the keys and told him the car was running fine. He said he'd replaced the solenoids, the filter and the gasket. He told Robert to drive it easy for a day or two while the new fluid circulated and then it should shift clean. Robert stood up slowly. He reached for his wallet. Marcus put his hand up and shook his head. Robert's voice was rough when he spoke. He said he couldn't just take something for nothing. He said that wasn't how he was raised. Marcus said he wasn't giving him something for nothing. He said one veteran helping another isn't charity, it's duty. That's when Robert's posture changed. He straightened up slightly. He looked at Marcus differently. He asked what branch. Marcus said, Army, 3rd Infantry Division. Robert said 25th Infantry. Marcus paused. He looked at the patches on Robert's jacket for the first time. Really looked. The Tropic Lightning shoulder patch was faded but unmistakable. The yellow and red lightning bolt on the taro leaf. Below it, a combat infantry badge. Below that, a small rectangular patch with the designation of Robert's mechanized unit. Marcus recognized the unit lineage. The 25th Infantry Division's mechanized elements had been reorganized multiple times over the decades, but the lineage tracked directly into units that the 3rd Infantry Division had worked alongside during restructuring exercises at Fort Stewart. They weren't the same unit. They weren't the same war, but they were connected by the kind of institutional thread that only soldiers understand. The thread that says the man who maintained APCs in the jungles of Vietnam in 1969 is the same kind of soldier as the man who rebuilt Humvee axles in the mountains of Paktika province in 2012. Different war, different enemy, different equipment, same oath, same sweat, same willingness to keep machines running so that other soldiers could come home alive. Marcus didn't say any of that out loud. He didn't need to. He extended his hand. Robert took it. They stood there in the lobby of a repair shop that had tried to take advantage of one of them, and they shook hands the way soldiers do. Firm, steady, eyes locked, no words necessary. Robert held the grip for an extra beat. His eyes were wet, but his jaw was set. He wasn't crying. He was doing something harder than crying. He was accepting help from someone he respected without feeling diminished by it. Marcus walked Robert out to the Crown Victoria. He opened the driver's door for him. Robert sat down, started the engine and put the transmission in drive. It shifted smooth and clean. No hesitation, no shudder, no lurch. Robert looked up at Marcus through the open window and said something quiet. He said, "You remind me of the guys I served with." Marcus said that was the best compliment anyone had ever given him. Robert drove away. The Crown Victoria moved through the parking lot and onto the street without a single rough shift. Marcus didn't go back inside Prestige. He got in his truck and drove to the parts store on the other side of town for the Tahoe filter. He didn't post anything online about what happened. He didn't make a scene. He went back to work. But the story didn't end in that parking lot. It kept going the way these things do when two people find an unexpected connection. Robert came by Cole's garage 2 weeks later. He brought a box of donuts from a bakery on Sullivan Avenue and a folded American flag in a triangular display case. The flag had been presented to him at his retirement ceremony in 1990, after 22 years of combined active and reserve service. He told Marcus he wanted him to have it. Marcus tried to decline. Robert insisted. He said the flag had sat on a shelf in his apartment for almost 30 years, and he wanted it somewhere it would mean something. Marcus put it on the wall above the register in his shop. It's still there. Below it, he taped a handwritten index card that says, "This flag was carried by Corporal Robert Dillard, 25th Infantry Division, Republic of Vietnam, 1968 to 1970, Bronze Star recipient, American." Robert started coming by the shop regularly after that. Once or twice a week. He'd bring coffee. He'd sit in the shop on an old stool Marcus set up near the tool bench, and he'd watch Marcus work. Sometimes he'd offer advice. The thing about a man who maintained military vehicles for a living in a combat zone is that he knows things that no amount of formal training can teach. Robert could diagnose a problem by listening to an engine idle, the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat. He'd hear something Marcus missed and point to it with a quiet confidence that came from decades of experience. Marcus started asking his opinion on difficult jobs, not out of politeness, out of genuine respect for what the old man knew. Within a few months, an informal arrangement developed. Robert became a fixture at Cole's garage. He didn't work there officially. He didn't collect a paycheck. But he was there, and his presence mattered. Customers noticed the old veteran sitting by the tool bench. Some of them asked about him. Marcus would tell them the short version. He'd say, "That's Robert. He's my advisor, and he knows more about engines than I ever will." Robert would wave off the compliment and take another sip of his coffee. But you could see what it did for him. It gave him a place to go, a reason to get up in the morning, a community that valued what he knew instead of dismissing him for what he looked like. Marcus later found out more about Robert's situation. The apartment Robert lived in was a one-bedroom unit in a subsidized housing complex on the south side. His wife had passed away in 2015. His only son lived in Oregon, and they spoke maybe twice a year. Robert's social circle had shrunk the way it does for a lot of aging veterans. The friends from his unit were mostly gone. The ones who survived the war didn't always survive the peace. Agent Orange, PTSD, alcoholism, and the slow grinding erosion of being forgotten by a country that moved on. Robert had been quietly disappearing into that silence for years. The Crown Victoria was his lifeline. It got him to his VA appointments, to the grocery store, to the pharmacy. Without it, he would have been homebound. When Dale Buckner slid that surrender form across the counter, he wasn't just trying to take a car. He was trying to take the last thing connecting Robert Dillard to the outside world. The story made it beyond the walls of Cole's garage through the veteran community in Columbus. Marcus didn't publicize it, but Robert told a few people at his VFW post about what happened, and veterans talk. A local veterans advocacy group caught wind of it and reached out to the Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division about Prestige Auto Repair's business practices. An investigation revealed that Prestige had a pattern of recommending unnecessary major repairs to elderly customers, particularly those who came in alone and appeared to have limited automotive knowledge. The shop's average transmission repair bill was 3 times the regional average for comparable work. Prestige was eventually cited for deceptive business practices and fined. Dale Buckner was terminated. The shop changed ownership within a year. Marcus Cole's garage grew steadily after that, not because of the story, but because he ran an honest operation and word got around. He started offering discounted rates for veterans and seniors. He posted his labor rates on the wall where everyone could see them. He explained every repair in plain language before he started the work. He built the kind of shop that Robert Dillard deserved to walk into that morning in March, and didn't. Within 2 years, Cole's garage had expanded to 5 bays, and Marcus had hired 2 additional mechanics, both of them veterans transitioning out of the service who needed a place to land. Robert continued to visit the shop regularly until the spring of 2022, when his health declined enough that getting out became difficult. Marcus started going to Robert's apartment instead. He'd check on him, make sure the Crown Victoria was running right, and sit with him for an hour. They didn't always talk about cars. Sometimes Robert told stories from Vietnam. Sometimes Marcus told stories from Afghanistan. Sometimes they just sat in silence and drank coffee and watched the traffic go by through the window. The silence was never uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that only exists between people who understand each other without needing to explain. Robert Dillard passed away in August of 2023 at the age of 77. Marcus was one of the pallbearers. The folded flag that Robert had given him was returned to the family for the burial, and afterward, Robert's son brought it back to the garage. He said his father would have wanted it to stay on that wall. Marcus hung it back in its place above the register. He replaced the index card with a small brass plaque that reads the same words as before but adds one line at the bottom. He fixed machines so soldiers could come home. A soldier came back and fixed his. That plaque is still there in Columbus, Ohio, on the wall of a 5-bay garage run by a veteran who once stopped in a parking lot to do the right thing. Every veteran who walks into that shop sees it. Every one of them understands exactly what it means. The bond between those who have served doesn't expire with a discharge date. It doesn't weaken with age. It doesn't depend on whether you fought in a jungle or a desert, whether you carried an M16 or a wrench. It lives in the recognition that someone else raised their right hand and swore the same oath you did, and when one of them is in trouble, another one shows up. Not because they were asked, not because they'll be rewarded, because that's what the oath means when you strip away the ceremony and the paperwork and the politics. It means I've got your back, even if we never met, even if we never served together, even if the only thing we share is the knowledge that we both said yes when our country asked. Subscribe to my channel if you believe that real honour isn't found in medals or monuments. It's found in a parking lot on a cold morning, with a wrench in your hand and a stranger who turns out to be your brother.